Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Pixel Show. I'm your host, Robert Evans, and we're back with another of one of our ongoing episodes, one of my favorite episodes, The Power of Simple. Thanks, everyone who's been watching and following along. We'd love you to keep coming back and to tell all your friends. Let's just jump right in to today's episode of The Power of Simple. So before we get started, I really wanted to show you quickly, bring your attention to some of our previous episodes that we have up on YouTube right now. Go watch them, comment on them, tell us what you think, but quickly I'll run them down. We just did our latest show on the most underrated lens for Sony mirrorless. So you go watch it and see what I think that is. I do a full review on the 135 1.8 G Master. I shoot some bridal fashion in the snow. That's a great episode. There's a Wish I Took That, where I feature 6 or 7 images from other photographers. I always look on the internet and I'm looking for work that encourages me. So I'm featuring other people and pointing out their work to you. There's the bio show. So if this is your first show and you're like, well, what's this show all about? Who's this guy? Go back and watch the bio show. Obviously, it's episode number 1. Gives you a good idea of who we are and where we're going and what we're doing. And then there's 2 other episodes of The Power of Simple, which we're going to do today. Depth of Field. And then the last other one is Motion Blur. So anyway, let's jump right in and let's start off with this. So what I'm teaching you really is simple techniques that will help you focus your vision and make your work more powerful. We're going to do a lot of things on this show, but I truly believe in making the images and making a beautiful image. You know, some people do a lot on tech and how to use the cameras, and yes, I'm going to do that. But I also really want to focus on composition and how to make your images better, keep your images more simple, and make them more powerful. Here are some of the topics that we talk about on The Power of Simple. We're going to cover color, emotion, retouching, cropping, light, middle ground, foreground, background, depth of field, you name it. Some of these elements are compositional elements, and some of them aren't. These are the things that I believe make your images more powerful and the things that you can think about and concentrate on while you're taking photos. So today's episode, we are going to cover expression and emotion. This is not composition. Emotion is something that's very important, especially when you're photographing people. And I'm a wedding portrait people photographer, majority of what I do. So I really like to focus on emotion and to tell a story. So let's start off with the definition of emotion. Emotion is a conscious mental reaction, such as joy or sadness, subsequently experienced as a strong feeling directed towards a specific object or person, and typically accompanied by a physiological behavior or change in the body. So a smile, a tear, something like that. I mean, we all know what emotion is, right? So today's first image, this is an engagement image that I shot many years ago. As a matter of fact, one of the things I noticed when I was putting the show together, all the images I picked except for one are film. But let's look at this image. So this is an engagement image that I did with a couple. One of the things that I do, and is a good side tip, is I always ask my couples, take me someplace that's important to the two of you. It could be a place you got engaged. It could be a first date. But I want the location to have some meaning to you or to them, as opposed to me taking them to a park that I always shoot at, because A, I'm going to get bored and the park's not going to mean anything. So anyway, sometimes when I ask this question, I get to go to fun places, not just someplace locally. And they took me to the winery in Sonoma where they worked together and they met. So there was this really cool old truck there with the wine barrels on it, and I saw it and I was like, well, of course, we have to use it. So I got them up on the back of the truck and they had their wine, and I talked to them and I sort of let them interact as well. So this is a real expression. This is just them enjoying each other and me capturing a moment. But let's look at a few of the other elements of simple in here, or the things that I talk about in the power of simple. The first one is rule of thirds. So they are not centered in the photograph. They are on the right side of the frame. And then next, you have leading lines. So you have the lines of the truck leading towards them on the back of the truck and the front of the truck. As well as the barrels sort of create a pattern. One of the other things we talk about is patterns, lines, and space. So the barrels create a pattern leading towards them. And then it gives it a nice perspective. Like, you know, choose where you want to take this image from. If I was shooting straight into the back of the truck, I don't think this image would be as powerful as this one is. One of the things I always try to do, and which was taught to me by one of my first photography studios that I worked at, was walk around the shot. A photographer friend of mine, Michael Brannigan, used to always say that. And he'd say, you know, walk around the shot, because there's more than one shot in a picture. All right. The next image, this is probably one of my favorite first look images. And immediately I will tell you that I broke my rule that I always make, where I typically suggest to my couples that no one else be around, that it's just them. And the reason I say that, especially when it's a bunch of bridesmaids, is because I don't want to hear 5 girls going, oh, and sort of killing their moment. But in this particular case, it was her only bridesmaid that was with her, and she was, you know, tending to the dress. And so I said to her, I said, you can watch. I said, go back there and sit down. Just be quiet. I said, I don't mind if you're there. I just don't want to hear you. But then the flip side to that is, when you do have bridesmaids or moms or people watching this, you do get expressions like you see here. You do get good reactions. The trick is just to try to keep them silent while doing it. So anyway, the couple had seen each other for the first time. This wasn't the exact moment that they saw each other the first time, but they started practicing their first dance. And so I shot the first moments, and then, you know, she suggested, oh, let's practice our first dance. And then I turned around to see, you know, what my bridesmaid was doing, and this is what she was doing. And so I got this amazing expression of her, and then, of course, their reflection in the window. So some of the other elements that come into play here, again, you have rule of thirds. Like, she's not centered in the photograph. I typically do not like to center things unless it calls for it, and that really is going to make my shot. You have reflection. Reflection's always a good. Whenever you can use a reflection in a shot and it works, it's always a good crowd pleaser. And then color. I really think color is another thing that helps images stand out. And the fact that she's wearing a bright red dress really helps this image pop. And the bride and groom also become kind of secondary in the background. And of course, we're talking about emotion and expression, and there's definitely a great expression on her face. All right, here's another image from a wedding. This was in Santa Monica, California. Now, one of the things that I do at my weddings is I spend the last 30 minutes before my brides walk down the aisle with them. I'm sort of a fly on the wall. I'm at their side, and I shoot sort of all this behind the scenes stuff. So in this case, we were getting married at a church, or the bride was getting married, and she pulled up in the limo, and she was sitting in the limo outside of the church, and all the guests had gone in. This was like maybe 2 or 3 minutes. You know, the girls were already lined up, and these were her sisters, and they came over to the car, and she rolled down the window. So I followed the girls over there, and you know, took this great image as the bride smiled as the window came down. So some of the other elements then here, of course, you have rule of thirds again. She's in the left third of the frame. You have leading lines. You know, the window splits the frame, and you have the lines, you know, sort of leading into her and leading to the girls. I mean, I know it divides it in half. You have a reflection again. Here's another great example of a reflection. And then a frame within a frame. So she's framed, the girls are framed. To me, what makes this image is all the 3 smiles. The eyes on the bride, and just the shiny faces, and the genuine, authentic reactions. So this image, this is a fun image. This is street photography. I've been to Europe many times, and when I go to Europe, like just walking around with a camera, you want to shoot whatever there is to shoot, whether it's landscape, whether it's people, you name it. And so this guy was on the street, and I really first noticed his ice cream cone because I love that there was just this long tail on this cone. And I walked by and I looked at him and I said, "Could I take your picture?" And probably he didn't understand me because he spoke Italian and I spoke English and I didn't think. But he just turned and gave me this look. So I just click, and I really love it. I mean, it's funny, it's comical. It's just a really great expression. The ice cream on the tip of his tongue, sort of to me mimics the thin tip of the cone at the other side. So what other elements? There aren't too many here. I think depth of field is the only one that I could come up with. And there's a slight depth of field in this image. Again, it's film, so I don't know what my camera settings were. My guess that it was about 5.6 because the background, you still see the mannequins in the window behind him. But that's the one thing. But again, expression and emotion. If you're looking for those things when you're taking a photo, I truly believe a candid is not just people not paying attention. A really good candid, depending on what's happening, is catching some real true emotion, catching something that helps to tell a story, catching something that draws you into the image. Now this image, when I was setting this up, I realized, and I was doing a little bit of the math. Well, first of all, it was taken in Sweden, it's called Gamlestan, Sweden, which is the oldest city in Stockholm. The first known records of this city were about the 13th century, and I think it flourished a little bit more in the 15th, 16th centuries, but the earliest records are the 13th century. And again, I was doing some street photography, black and white, walking around. This was my very first trip to Europe. I chose to go to Sweden because of the blonde girls, to be honest with you, 25 years ago. And it was well worth it. Beautiful blonde girls, tall Nordic women there. But it's a beautiful city. I went to Sweden and I went to Copenhagen. But this image, this is probably one of my still all-time favorite street images. I really love this image. If you heard the music that this old guy was playing and the kids, I just love the expression on these kids' face and how they're all sort of drawn in. Now, when I was thinking about this today, and it really brings you back to why photography is so important and so valuable, because we sort of stop a moment in time. So I took this image 25 years ago. These kids look to be about 13 to 14 years old. So that would put them about 38, 39 years old. These kids probably now have kids. And of course, the sad part is that old man is probably no longer with us. But these kids are like all adults and possibly some of them still friends. And can you imagine, if they had this image today and, some of them were still friends? I was even thinking it'd be fun to go back and try to recreate it. Of course, that's probably impossible because how would I get a hold of all those people? But it's one of the things that I really love about photography. And, it's just so timeless, these children. Okay, so some of the elements in this one, again, you have rule of thirds. I have the musician framed in the right and the kids to the left. You have depth of field because I'm focused on him. The kids are slightly out of focus. The lady walking up the street is a little more out of focus than that. And then leading lines, you have the line along the curb. If you look at right along the curb, leading to him, and then the lines leading to the kids. And then really the kids sort of create a line, a horizontal line leading kind of towards him. So your eye kind of goes back and forth and keeps you right in that image. And then the last image today, this is one of my favorite candids from a wedding. And ironically, this was the very first time I started off shooting weddings on a Hasselblad. I shot medium format for many years, color and black and white film, because you could, of course, just change the film backs. But this was the very first time that I took a 35 millimeter camera to a wedding to specifically shoot candids or photojournalistic type images, because it was a lot easier to do. And 35 millimeter film was starting to become more accepted in wedding photography, because when I started, if you did not shoot medium format, you weren't a good photographer. So I caught this image. Here's the full version of the image of grandma telling someone her very poignant opinion, of course. I used to use this image years ago in an ad that said, "Don't let grandmother find out you're not using Robert Evans." So I was thinking now I'm going to use it for an ad for social media that says, "Don't let grandmother find out you're not watching the Pixel Show." So anyway, let's look at what other elements there are in here. There's not many, again, depth of field, because she is a little bit separate from the background. That's why it is important. You don't always have to shoot everything as wide as your camera will go, 1.2, 1.4, 1.8. It does really create nice separation, but sometimes it is nice to see stuff in the background. Now in this image, honestly, I would rather probably not have the wine in focus so much, and she has a little point and shoot camera on the table. I'd rather it be a little bit more focused on her, but it's still a great image. Why? Because of her expression and because of the moment that I caught. So I really encourage you to go out and look for expression. Wait, watch, hunt. Look for the moment. Don't just take it candid because people aren't looking at the image. Wait for the precise moment to find that bit of emotion. And even in today's world, with a lot of our cameras shooting, 8 frames a second, 10 frames a second, think about that when you're shooting candids or you're shooting something at a wedding. Put your camera on fast so that it shoots 8 or 10 frames a second, or whatever your cameras will do, so that maybe you can catch one of these moments. Now this is luck, this is film, this is one pull of the trigger and catching this. But really look for those moments and go out there and take some great emotional images. So as we wrap up, just going over the 6 images from today, I really appreciate everyone watching. I hope you like this. If you do like it, please tell your friends, please subscribe, please like. Everyone on YouTube asks that, but we're trying to build something here, and I would love your comments. Tell me what you want to see, tell me what you like, tell me what you don't like. At this point, we can cater and tweak the show. But the power of simple is one of the themes of this show. We're going to use it in the future for photo contests. So when we start doing photo contests, we're not going to say, "Oh, send me your best bride photo," because I don't want to alienate people that watch this show that don't photograph weddings or don't photograph people. So we will do the contest based on the principles of the power of simple. Maybe it's depth of field, maybe it's rule of thirds, maybe it's middle ground, foreground, background. But those are the type of things and how we're going to do the photo contests. So be sure you can follow us on social media. We're on Instagram at The Power of Simple, Twitter, The Power of Simple YT. If you search us, you'll find us. And that's it. So thanks for watching another episode of The Pixel Show. I'm your host, Robert Evans, and thanks for coming back.